Okay, welcome everybody. I will call the November 14th meeting of the Maynard Finance Committee to order at 7:03. Need to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, so please be careful not to screen share anything that you would not like captured in that recording. Also, any votes this evening will be done by a roll call vote. And I just need to check and make sure that all of our participants are able to participate remotely and can hear me. So I will start with Ken.
Yes.
Danielle.
Yes.
Peter.
Yes.
Jillian.
Yes.
Katie.
Yes.
And Kevin, you just joined us. Hello.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. I am
Okay.
present.
Excellent. And Lori will be discussing with you tonight as well. Okay, thank you. So to get us started tonight, our big agenda item is looking at the forecasting projection tool based on the Collins model that we had done a couple years ago now, I think. And Danielle has been doing our first pass at this, trying to update it and see what's there and what looks good and what we can use. And so tonight is just for her to sort of give us what she's learned so far, where it's at, and discuss with Lori. And also want to talk with Lori a little bit about the options we have with ClearGov. And we're just kind of gonna go through this a bit and see where it takes us and what we think is useful and helpful and go from there. So Danielle, do you want to share your screen and get us going? And everybody, you should have this if you want to look on your various screens if it's easier. And it is also up on our board docs.
Can
Okay, go
everyone
ahead,
see
Dan.
the Excel doc?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So full transparency, as all of you know, I'm no expert in this this workbook. So this was new to me. I volunteered to take a first pass at it, both to try to update it on a detailed level, but also to try to see if we could stack another tool on top of it to do more of like a high level approach. So the model itself is really robust, which is fantastic when you're digging into assumptions, but also really cumbersome to update because of that. So with, volunteer time here and the resources that we have with the town, that's a lot to update at that level. So I took some of what I do day to day is a lot of high level future modeling, and I put that on top of this, but I wanted to retain the Collins model and not break anything within that, not deviate from what everyone who has used this in the past is used to. So just to kind of give you that as where my head was at as I was going through this. So unfortunately, I ran into having a lot less availability than I thought I'd have for this. Because I'm a nerd, I dedicated vacation days to this. But then my kids spiked a fever 2 vacations in a row. So that has not gone as well as planned. So one of the things I did as I went through this is pretty much on every tab in here, you'll see like a red box with white lettering where I tried to say like what I had done, where I left off, what's open, what's not. It's not fully complete in terms of, if you address everything in the red boxes, it still needs a full pass to say, did we get everything? But I tried to make it easy to hopefully hand off because I have 2 small children and it looks like there's no end in sight for my limited availability. So I don't want to slow us down because I do think that there's a lot of good information we can get from this with a forward-looking view. So I used information that's publicly available on our Maynard Town website. I used some information from Lori. Lori, thank you. That was very helpful. There's definitely some things in here that I noted that someone's going to be following up with you for more information, as you might suspect. Hopefully easy to pull stuff. I just kind of tried to save it so that I could get through as much of this as possible. But so I won't go into everything in here in super detail, but this sheet that I'm on right now is the summary. So this pulls a lot of the other tabs, a lot of the assumptions there, and pulls it into a summary format. So it's got our revenues up at the top, our expenditures. You can come down and see what our surplus is, both on an annual and a cumulative basis, or in this case, we actually end up in a deficit. Again, this is not fully updated. So don't take these numbers and kind of run with them as, saying that we have a deficit. We don't. It's just not fully updated at this point. I tried to put in the framework for that kind of high level model to sit on top, and made that my priority with the time that I had, because I figured that was kind of something that was living in my brain and easier for me to get through that part. And then we can go through and really scrub all of the data that rolls into it. Lana, I was not planning on walking through like all the Collins model tabs, one, because I'm no expert in it. So I don't know that the blind leading the blind is going to be really helpful. But I figured I'd just walk through, what I did, and then kind of the high level tabs that I added on top, since that'll be new to everyone.
A question, Danielle, if I may, is there more detail like this broken down in the revenue part at the top? Or is it, I think we started in the middle, but.
Yeah, so it lists the revenues to some degree of detail, but then if you go over to the revenue projections, there's much greater detail on that tab.
Okay.
It rolls up into that summary there.
Thank you.
And that's one of the things I found too that's going to be a little bit challenging, is some of the tabs where I put in detailed assumptions. I thought it would flow to other tabs. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. So there might be some stuff in here where we kind of have to scrub for like what's hard coded, and best practice would be to link those as much as we can. For instance, there's a tab over here for budget data, and this has essentially our full budget year by year. You can see it starts going 2017, but most of the data starts 2020. I went through 2022 and 2023 and thought that was going to flow to a lot of other tabs, and it didn't. So I don't know if going back, this was something that was supposed to be more reference, or if some links got broken along the way.
Another quick comment, and I'm going to be quiet.
No, it's okay.
This model, as far as I can tell, was really Mike Guzzo's model, predecessor to Lori, and some of the tabs were really done by Jillian, not the Collins Center. The Collins Center had drafted financial policies and a lot of other things and referenced some of this material, but I would not say, unless Jillian can correct me, that this is a Collins Center model. It's really Maynard's model. And it aligns with what they were talking about, certainly, and so Department of Local Services as well.
Okay.
Jillian, am I right about that, Jillian?
Sorry, I'm on like triple double mute here. Am I off mute now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. I made like a pivot table. So I think in the spreadsheets that I did with Bob, I think everything was linked. So like everything from the spreadsheet, I highlighted certain cells. So I don't know that every single thing was linked, but there was like a pivot table where like, I know at least the summaries were linked. I'm honestly not as familiar with the Collins model and what it did and did not contain. It just seemed like it had more information than the models that I did.
This is
Seems like it had more detail.
So my recollection, and again, I'm a little hesitant to put this forward as being definitive, but my recollection was that didn't the Collins people talk to you, Bob?
They did.
And there was so the fact that there would be a lot of alignment between the model that they were putting forward and the model that we had been using previously would not, to me, be surprising.
Okay.
So,
so in other words, maybe they put together a model that doesn't have the pivot table kind of information that Jillian had put in on Mike's. But I guess this hasn't been touched since 2020 when it was delivered, if indeed it came from the Collins Center. Is that true? We haven't updated it from whatever was drafted in that first go round.
So
Yeah,
And
that-
Lori,
No.
my sense is
No.
that's sort of where we are
okay,
right now is with Lori coming on board. Then that's sort of where we're trying to get the ball rolling again.
Mhm.
good. So Lori, I mean, maybe you would know if the data that is in this spreadsheet, I don't know who started working on it, you first or Danielle, but do you know if this is what was delivered to Greg from the Collins Center effort?
Yes, this is. This
Okay,
is, I
so-
supplied it to Alana and Danielle. This is typical. We use this in Townsend as well, and our forecast was very similar.
Oh, good.
It's slightly different for Maynard, but a few different tabs than we had. Ours was done probably 2 years previous to this. But
Okay.
this is the model, and like I said, Danielle has added a few things to it, but it is very robust and cumbersome to update, and I think that's what has taken us so time. We have started updating it on our side. But thankfully Danielle has done a lot of the work.
Yeah. So are there graphs, for instance, like there were in the model summary that I know Jillian worked on a few
There's
years
not
ago?
much in here from what I
No.
saw.
Okay.
They don't do a lot of graphs,
Okay,
in my
Nope,
experience.
nope.
Yeah, and I think my kind of gut while I was going through this is we probably want to generate graphs once we get to a point where we're wanting to look at specific things, but I didn't put any in it as of now because I think that we kind of have to see what's the relevant thing. So I mean, you always have your big things to look at, like overall revenues, overall expenses, but when we want to dive into anything to see trends of what's, either concerning or promising or warrants further inspection, I think that'll kind of come out as we're refreshing this. And just to keep things simple, I highlighted the tabs that I added. So these ones in kind of like this medium blue color or teal or whatever it is, that's just to signify those are the ones I added on top, just so that, as this kind of morphs over time, we know that those are added on top of it. I did make sure that these link. And I think that most of this stuff, if we were to go through and kind of link it all together, I think everything I saw made sense to have in here. I think that there were probably just some places where people were reflecting changes on multiple tabs without linking it, which is common. So this was the big thing that I wanted to do, a high level forecast. So this is in pretty decent shape in terms of structure. But again, until we get the rest of it fully updated, your kind of starting point of like F23 isn't going to be as useful until it's scrubbed. So what I did was I started out with total revenues, and we can always blow this out more if we decide, but I wanted to stay at a really high level for now. And so you have two choices here. One is that you can put in an override percentage. So if we want to assume that revenues are going to grow by 2% per year, you'll just put it in. So you can put that in for any year. You don't have to choose whether you want to use high level assumptions or all the detailed ones for the entire model. You can choose on a year by year basis. And once you put something in here, so if I put 2% in here, sorry, bad example because that's too far back. If I put 2% in starting in 2023, which is our most current active year, so 2022 should be actuals, 2023 is the first of the forecasted, it's going to change what shows up in revenues here. If I put nothing in there, it's going to link to the backup tabs. So you can choose whether you want to toggle back and forth. So if you say like our detail build is building up to this, but I want to see what happens if we have a different growth rate, you can just pop that in. And there's a formula in these green cells that says if there's something here, use it. If there's not, use the backup tabs. And like I said, if we wanted to break this down in further detail, we can. But I think that for the most part, we kind of have like an overall revenues growth rate that we might want to look at because a lot of the more detailed assumptions aren't really going to move the needle enough to look at it on a high level basis. And in that case, we might actually just want to dive into the details at that point. I did break up the expenditures a little bit. So this is basically what rolls up to the general fund. Same thing. There's this kind of blue font row where you can, say, I want to make this 10%, it jumps up. Otherwise, it uses the backup tabs. There's a row where you can put in an overlay for a reserve. I didn't put anything in here, but if you put an amount in here, You can see it rolls into the totals now and gets taken into account. State and county assessments, same thing. You can put in a percentage or you can choose to let it flow from the backup tabs. And then capital, these are just straight hard coded. You can hard code what you want in here. If we want to link it to the summary, you can copy over this formula here. We can make that more flexible if we want to, but for now, I figured high level capital assumptions as probably the route that I would go if I were doing this as part of like my day job. So then getting down here to water sewer enterprise funds, that should say enterprise funds. Same thing, and I lumped water and sewer together here. We could break them out, but I generally think of them together. And so what I did was if there's detailed assumptions, they flow up to here, except if there's an override down here, then it takes the override instead and it splits it between the two. Open to feedback on if we want to treat that differently, but I figured it's a good starting point. And then there's a couple calculated rows in here. So this one down here, this one up here, we can add as many of these as we want. And it just shows you the year over year change so that you can see if there's trends that you want to look at, or you can also use it to inform what an overall growth rate might make sense to model out. Then down here, you have your annual surplus or deficit, what percentage of expenditures that is, and then the cumulative starting as of F20. So this is similar to what I would do for a company rather than a town, but I think it's still applicable in terms of toggling back and forth between detailed assumptions when you have them, or high level assumptions if you just want to model out various scenarios. Because one of the things that I think is hard with this model is everything's so detailed that if you want to say like, well, what if I change this one thing? It's like, okay, now change it and make sure it flowed through like 17 different things and that it does what you think it did. Whereas with this, you can just do a high level and you're not wiping out anything in the backup tabs. So you're not going to override anything and then forget that you wiped out a number or anything like that. It's also not going to change it so that, someone passes it off to someone else, like Lori and the finance committee are passing it back and forth or something. We don't have to worry that someone hard coded it and forgot because they wanted to see like what one number did. This tab is for analysis. So one of the things we've been talking about is back when this was originally done, we expected a pretty dire financial state for the town. And as of now, we really haven't seen that come to fruition at the level that we expected. So why is that? Did things change drastically in the town? Did we conservatively estimate revenues? Did we, have any number of things happen that would have led to a better financial outcome than we had originally projected? So this, again, not super useful to take the numbers and run with right now, but once the backup tabs are, the format's here. So it's got the original projection from the original model. So I copied this in before I started changing anything. And then this is the revised projection. So this will be a place where we can start linking up to the summary tab over here, and then the variance over here. So we can take a look and we can say, like, we thought, property taxes would rise by this percent. They actually rose by that percent. What drove it? What does that mean for the future? So it can help us model better in the future if we're using certain assumptions and it turns out that that they've been different. Is it a one-time thing or is that our new trend? So all of this needs to be kind of linked up to the summary, but once it is, and once the summary has been updated for all the backup tabs, this will all flow through and we can start looking at these variances and saying, why were the original assumptions the way they were, or why is reality different than we thought it would be? And then this open tab is just a list of my notes. So as I was going through, I just took notes on things that I didn't know quite where they fit, or I didn't see them in the model, but I thought, maybe they should be somewhere, and maybe they are, and maybe I just didn't get to that part, but I figured it would be helpful to have kind of what was in my brain. So not that I'll know the answers, but does anyone have any questions?
So I guess I have a bunch, but I think that we could go into detail. So what is kind of the state of this model? What outstanding items need to be Do we have a list of like, do we have like a to-do list that you put together?
Yeah, this open tab has a list of
Oh.
kind of overall things. And then on every tab, there's this kind of, sorry, my screen's freezing now. There's like a red box that says, oh, it's gonna crash on me. There's a red box that says open and it lists out anything that I know is open. But once we get like a full refresh done, we should also take another look through and scrub it and make sure that there's nothing else that kind of looks off that we should dig into and make sure it's fully updated.
And in general, is the projection model, is it just like a fixed, is essentially a fixed percentage cost escalation per year that you, or is there like more detail that we feed in? Like what?
There's a
what's
ton
the-
of detail. So
Okay.
there's like a dozen tabs in here. Sorry, my
Okay.
Excel is currently crashing.
You can feel free to shut it and reopen or whatever you got to do.
Yeah, we'll see what it does. It's saying it's
Okay.
trying to auto recover.
Well,
But yeah,
that's-
there's like a dozen tabs in here. They're very, very detailed, like to
Okay.
the point that I started asking Lori for information. And I was like, I'm gonna hold off until I have a whole list of things because it goes into a level of detail that goes beyond like anything I could find in kind of the town meeting warrants or anything like that. So oh, it came back. So you'll see like this is the summary and this is kind of the level of detail that we're often looking at. And then there's kind of a step down from some of these, which is the information that we look at on a regular basis. But when you get to town meeting, it's usually kind of laddered up from there. But then there's even more. And once you get into like, you can do cost of living increases, you can see the retirement projections, there's capital projections, there's debt schedules, there's all sorts of stuff in here. So that's all like very detailed level. But what I put in here for the high level forecast, it'll either take that or it'll take whatever overriding assumptions you want to put in. But you, like I said, you can do it year by year. So for instance, if we want to say revenues are going to increase 2% per year, we put 2% in here. It takes 2% instead of taking the detailed tabs. If we think that we're going to have some like new development and it's going to kick in F28 and now it's going to be 3%, then we can make that year 3% and out. So there's a lot of flexibility in the assumptions that you can use in it.
Because I'm starting to put together a list of kind of gotchas, like items that would deviate from an exponential growth trend, or non-discretionary items that we don't have control over. Like with the budget, we have certain areas of control, like we can give each department a fixed percentage increase, which seems to be the practice. But there's also non-discretionary costs that we do not control. Like for example, the out-of-district education costs is one example. Another example of a non-discretionary cost is our infrastructure spending. So what I would like to do is kind of get a list of the inputs to the model, possibly areas where the model hasn't covered on the non-discretionary costs. And then I would like to try to get a handle on, on a prediction or a projection of what those non-discretionary costs are going to look like, because that ultimately is what's going to nail our town and kind of cause disruption in kind of the operation of our government or the lives of our citizens.
Yeah, so you kind of have two options with this model. So one is, like I said, you can go into those detailed tabs. There's fields for pretty much everything you can think of and more. Every time I thought I had kind of seen what was in here, I found more new levels of detail. So there's absolutely the flexibility to do that. And then on this high level one that I put in, if you have anything that doesn't kind of fit into a general growth rate, you can put it in an overlay. And then, what I typically do at work is just throw in a review comment that says, this is what my assumptions were.
Okay. I see Ken's hand up, so I want to give him a go as well.
Yeah, so I think it's worthwhile to step back for a minute and understand what we were trying to accomplish. Part of this is to make sure that since they're new FinCom members, since Lori is relatively is new since we went through this. So we were looking to have one tool that was used by everybody, not just the FinCom, but that could be used by, the town staff. So obviously Lori, Greg, and so forth, by the FinCom, by school committee, select board, the Capcom, so that they could see and understand, the general condition of things going forward. Number two, we were looking to track the last 5 years of data, the current year, and 5 upcoming years, with the idea being that we would, be able to look at past trends to help us inform about the current year. So, you would have, say, the past 4 years, you would have the current year, both the plan as well as, year-to-date actuals. Then, you would then have the current plan for the coming fiscal year, which, usually starts out in the fall, and then there are several iterations going through to town meeting. But, there's an original, plan, and then there are numerous discussions and plans. But to help the select board, the FinCom, school committee sort of see the different versions that the town administrator is putting forward. And so, again, one tool, 5 years back, current year, 5 years looking forward. In terms of the expenditures, it would be the 8 main accounts that we are using. I think the fact that there are more detailed worksheets is fine, as long as somebody is going to update that. But we were just looking, from a utility perspective of being able to track expenditures on the 5 accounts, and then obviously on the revenue side, be able to project forward what was going on there. In terms of the graphical, I think there was a recognition that many, particularly members of the town meeting voters and so forth, would find it easier to digest the information in a graphical format, which is why we're trying to work towards that. And then, finally, the idea here, and that seems to have been retained in this one, was the idea that we would be able to do, a little bit of wargaming or different scenarios, sort of saying, well, if revenues went up by this amount, or if expenditures went up by this amount, what would happen? And so that seems to be retained. One of the things that I particularly would like to see us do is be able to track school expenditures, which isn't just the Maynard schools, but it also includes what we send out and out of district, both in terms of the charter schools as well as school choice. But, I want to make sure that as we go forward, we're recognizing a critical aspect of this was that it'd be one tool that would be kept updated, presumably by town staff, not that the members of FinCom or whoever couldn't help with certain aspects of that, but we're talking about having one tool. And in terms of your question, Danielle, about what happened, I'm sure we could go and track exactly what happened. I know that prior to COVID, we were very worried about a cliff that we saw coming, 3 or 4 years down the road. Now, obviously, COVID, both in terms of revenues that the town got, as well as expenses that we had, really threw a wrench in our projections. But now that we're sort of post pandemic, we certainly, we're starting to get back to a more normal cadence of operations. I'd like to see us sort of come to agreement on an approach for this model, in terms of using one model by the town administration, by the school committee, by the FinCom, by the select board, by the Capcom, and so forth, that would be maintained 5 years back, 5 years, going forward, which would allow us to do the kind of gaming and scenarios that we'd like to have. That's what we were shooting for. And I think anything short of that, ends up, ends up will end up within some period of time as being an unusable tool. So that's I guess my feeling about this.
Okay. Yeah, I want to touch on some of that as well. And also just thank Danielle so much for diving into this and for the work that you have done. And I love the idea of adding some high level functionality to this and some analysis, and frankly, some tabs that are easier to digest and read, because I don't think this model is, particularly user friendly for an average, volunteer or member of a committee. So having those, I think, is really helpful. To Ken's point of the one usable model, I think the big question that I have is, is this that? And my concern is the updating, this, the ability to have this as Ken, and I agree, if you let it go at all for much length of time, it will become, again, like a huge slog to get it back to usable. And I had having some discussion with Lori about, what they might be using moving forward, they being the finance team at town hall, and what, there might be using with ClearGov, what they've used in the past. I forget the name of the other program that you were using, Lori, prior to trying to go with ClearGov. What was it called?
Oh, we were using like a multi-step process before we decided to go with ClearGov for budgeting. We were using SoftWrite and just spreadsheets.
Yeah. So, they're also are been going through a bit of a transition on their best practice. And part of my thought is, again, like Ken said, that we don't really want the finance team and the staff to be doing one thing and then also having to update something or trying to help us update something, because their time and just the reality of that, I don't think is going to work. So, so those are, that's my question is this the way to move forward in what we are trying to accomplish? Or do we take some of this data and some of the functionality and bring it into either ClearGov or what our, our staff and our finance team is going to be using? Katie, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. I came in, I think, after this model was developed, but is this something we paid a substantial amount of money to get? And is there an ongoing cost to have this program?
Good question. We did, correct me, was it a grant or
I
was
think
it?
there was so first off, the base model was a model that the finance committee, and I think, for the most part, that was Bob, but also Jill put in a lot of time putting together some of the graphical representations of. Certainly, Peter and I and other folks weighed in on that, but I think that's what it is. So certainly, oh Lord have mercy, Lori's predecessor,
Mike Guzzo.
Mike had some inputs on that as well. Then it got given to then Collins was asked to put a model. There was a grant that paid for that. And Bob again, spent some time working with them to help help them understand what we're doing. I guess, to answer, Katie's concern is, while we have put time and effort into this, I think we also have to recognize that Lori comes in with a lot of expertise. And so our goal, I think, is to come to agreement as a committee with Lori, with Greg, with the select board, the school committee, and so forth, on whatever that is. I think as long as it's one model that we're all using in order to communicate with one another, the time we spent in the old models are certainly going to inform, what we do going forward. And so I wouldn't view it as being, wasted effort or wasted money or anything like that. If it helps us, look, whatever model we get to, if we're at a better model, then what we learned from the previous one will be lessons well learned, and we'll incorporate that going forward. So I don't think we need to worry about that. I think that's why I said I want to step back. There's nothing sacred. Moses didn't come down from Mount Sinai with these tablets of the model and say, okay, this is, ye shall use this model going forward. So I think we can, I think it represents best practice, a lot of good thinking. It shouldn't be tossed aside, but we really need to work to where we can come to agreement on one model.
Yeah, I
That
agree.
makes
And
sense. Thank you.
yeah, and but your second question about whether, like, if this was a grant bought and paid for, at this point, it's Excel. It's not like a
Right.
a membership or something that we're continuing to pay for.
And it's more just town time that we're paying, but
Yep,
not
abs-
a monthly subscription or. Yeah.
Correct. Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
And yeah, I like what Ken was saying, that a lot of the effort and the time and getting what we have now is all going to be, useful and helpful moving forward. But really the goal is to make sure we don't end up, with something that is only used by a couple people and
Yeah.
doesn't talk to what everybody else is doing, or something that becomes too cumbersome, or because then it's not useful for,
Right.
for anybody. So, yeah, we're this is why we're here, to try to, work these things out. Kevin, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this is a standard software decision we have to make. We have to purchase some software. We have some existing software that may not be meeting everyone's needs. So I think the key decision is build versus buy, which is, do we build the model ourselves, or do we pay someone else, a third-party vendor, to build the model for us? What I propose is, as an action item for this committee, that we put so I don't think this committee is the prime stakeholder. I think that's Lori's group and the finance group of town, but I do think this committee does have a certain amount of input to be had. So what I propose is that we draft a letter to Greg, where we just put in, like, hey, we think this model is going to be really useful. Here's our input as to what we think, what we would like to get out of the model. And then put it before Greg and kind of encourage him to do as Ken said, and get everyone, select board, FinCom, schools, all on the same page, all talking to each other, all giving their input as to, like, what their requirements are for this potential software. And then put it to Greg and let him make the decision ultimately of how to best meet everyone's requirements.
I think I might want, hang on, Natasha, I do see your hand up, but Lori, do you have some thoughts on what's been said so far, reactions to that, moving forward?
Well, I kind of agree with, Ken and Kevin, is we have to agree on one model. We don't have the time, the staff time ability to be updating multiple models, answering, tons and tons of emails for information so everybody can be updating their own model. We do need to decide upon one that we're all going to use, committees and town staff, and go with it from there. So we as town staff know what we need to update, what everybody is looking for. So I definitely think we need to, like I said, bring Greg in. I know Greg couldn't be here tonight, but to decide which way we are going to go forward, whether we're going to stick with a more high level model like you used to use. I was looking at the model that Bob and Jillian created before. That's very, it's very nice. I think it's very useful. It's kind of on the idea of Danielle's high level model. Whether that would be more useful. Do we really need to get as granular as this Collins Center model is? And we don't know in the future what ClearGov is going to have, the capabilities. We have moved forward and we're launching ClearGov budgeting, operational budgeting, but there are other modules that come with it that we might be able to use in the future for forecasting. They do have a forecasting piece that's part of the operational budgeting. We just don't know what its abilities are yet. When Greg and I trained last week, we asked them about it, and they did say they were modifying the model because a lot of the algorithms within the model, I guess some towns were having difficulties with it because of COVID. COVID kind of threw the numbers from 2020 kind of threw a wrench in everyone's forecast. So they told us to wait a couple weeks. They were making modifications, and they would be coming out with a newer version of their forecasting. We don't know what that entails yet. We haven't even seen it. But it is part of the operational budgeting that we are launching this week. So, and I know with using ClearGov, they're uploading our information. I'm sending them reports right out of SoftWrite. They're uploading it into ClearGov. So we do, just from using the Transparency Center, we have years of certain information in there, whether it be expenditures and revenues, as long as the latest reports were sent in. Year-end reports were actually, sent in. I'm not sure. I wasn't here, but I have sent them in order to get the operational budgeting up and going. I made sure that they had 21, 22, and 23 year-end number, year-end budget numbers, as well as revenues, so we could move forward with that. So it might be another tool. I mean, it is already part of the operational budgeting platform that we purchased. So if that can help us, that would be great.
Let me just add, Alana, I think we should,
Sure.
I think we should request a tri-board meeting to discuss this item. I mean, ultimately, not urgent, but I think this is, if we could get this tool up and running and get all three boards aligned on a tool, I think it would be immensely useful for our budgeting process. So I would suggest, I would request a tri-board meeting to discuss this issue.
Okay, Natasha, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted, I know this was shared at the town budget subcommittee because we had talked a little bit about it, but there is, there's probably going to be a lot of difficulties with the school implementing, because the cost lines that they use are different with DESI codes to what the municipal codes are, and there's different mapping for that. So I also know that the timeline that the school approves their budget for the allocation is also different. It's not until after or closer to town meeting. So it might be helpful to understand what would be the requirements to use each of the tools, to put in, or what fields would be needed, because that might throw off if the expectation would be that the school would have all their expenses budgeted by December, right? Like if that's what we're intending to use, that will never happen. I just want to make sure that that's understood, because that doesn't happen. The school doesn't vote on that until at the end of the year going into it. But if it's a matter of the historical information of how the expenses were done and reconciliation and how that can inform future, I think that would be a helpful exercise. And I also think looking at the forecasting models of, the COLA, I thought the COLA tool was really, great, that high level of, as we're talking about contracts and what that COLA impact might be for different ones. And I know that there was like that capital project tab to plug in when there's those type of things that impact, like how does that go year to year? I think those would be really amazing. So I just want to maybe understand first, what would we want to gain, what is possible, and what would be the required functionality for either of those tools.
Yeah, I don't think we, so again, looking to prior to COVID, we were never expecting the school to be running its complete budget through this model. This was only for the town portion of that for our, for planning for the town, general budget. This is another reason why, while I really love all the detailed spreadsheets, worksheets and so forth, I'm concerned about the idea that, about keeping those updated. And so unless Lori is going to use the same spreadsheet, and it sounds like, she's going in a different direction, I think we probably want to bump this up to the level of, a planning tool with those 8 main expenditure budgets, which would include the school budget, as well as the allocation that goes out to school choice and to the charter schools. But just as a reminder, we were never expecting the schools to be running their entire school system budget through this model, just the town portion.
Jillian, go ahead. I see your hand raised.
I was going to say, this has been the difficulty with this budget forecasting exercise, is getting buy-in for it. And I think that was one of the reasons that it was sort of dropped. Sorry. So, I think that's, Remy agrees that it's something difficult to sort of align on. But, that's just something I want to point out, before we get too deep down this rabbit hole, we should make sure there's alignment. We have had tri-board meetings in the past, and there was sort of no action taken from those. It was, sort of commented on, it's a nice tool, but these are the following shortcomings. And I think that was why it wasn't officially adopted. So I don't want to be negative, but I do also want to be, I don't want people to do work that's not going to be productive in the end.
Yeah, no, it's not negative to be realistic and to know where we, what is actually going to happen. I mean, we could all say this tool is fantastic. It does everything we want. It's so amazing. But if it's not going to get updated and it's not going to get used, then it's not worth anything. So it's not, I think you're correct. And I don't think we went to the tri-board with this full model done.
Yeah,
though.
no, we did. It was the February meeting where we laid this out. So we did do this. We have to have some sort of planning tool, whether it's this or something else. We can't.
Right. I thought that was Bob and Jillian's though. Was that this one? This full done one?
Okay, so granted, then I view whatever goodness there is in the Collins model as being largely being derivative from the work that Bob and Jillian put into this.
Yeah. Yeah, my point was just that we haven't, we did do that. We presented that. I think the sort of thinking was like, this is really great. And we went ahead with the grant for Collins, but at that point, and then we got this, but it's never really gone from there. It's sort of, and COVID was part of that, but it was also just, I think, a little overwhelming and cumbersome to be quite frank, to anyone who isn't very good at these kinds of things. Bob, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. 2 comments. One is I wanted to take my opportunity to thank Danielle for her efforts, superlative effort. And I totally agree that some kind of a synopsis, a succinct summary, so that people can look at revenues and expenses. I mean, for instance, at all our town meetings, we show expenses, but we don't show the revenue side. We don't do it in a, any kind of a quarterly basis or anything else. So voters, they don't see both parts. And the summary well, it doesn't have the 8 categories that Ken was talking about. I think it's 9 actually with debt, but you know, I think if we could modify it so that it could be used that way, whether it's going through ClearGov or, you know, our own spreadsheet. I mean, if we don't think that we need all the information in that spreadsheet from the Collins Center, you just don't populate some of it, as long as the tools don't get corrupted or the macros, you know, the pivot tables don't give you junk information, then you can utilize some and not others. But these are our standard practices and best practices that other towns use. I mean, I just wanted to make that comment as well. And we haven't been doing it. So if you look at a warrant from Stowe 2 years ago, I think I shared that with you, Alana. They have a 7-page update on where the revenues are. To Kevin's point, it also says, here's what we have discretion to affect. It's 20% of our budget because they regionalized. And here's, this is how the trend is going. So how are we going to really be stewards of that 20% and difficult times and make tough decisions? So summary of this from my point of view is that I don't know what you called it, Danielle, the one that has the upper level should be the scenario. I think you called it wargaming, Ken. I hope we could get a better name for it than that. But to basically compare scenarios, if this, then that, that doesn't change all the data behind it, which Danielle has already done. Maybe expand it a little bit more to the 8 categories, maybe not. I mean, I'm always too wordy on these things, but it needs to have revenue and how the trend's going. You know, a couple of years back, at least 5 would be great. That current fiscal year and then the 5 ahead, and then you're plugging estimates. I think going in, the last comment I wanted just to make is that a budget, process is supposed to be asking department heads in November and December and putting out the TA recommended budget. And notwithstanding the fact that the final vote from the school committee is, nearer to town meeting, by the time you go into that February meeting, if there's challenge and struggle with how we're going to use that discretionary spending wisely, or capital, or free cash or anything else, even if it isn't finalized, which a lot of times it isn't, then you're not prepared to actually push back and say, here's where I have an issue with the TA recommended budget that comes out in January 1st. And then February becomes less a dialogue comparing those scenarios and more a putting Greg as the administrator in a tough position to say, this is what I think, but other people haven't dug in and haven't prepared for it and don't own it as a team. So that's what it should be. And just, I said it was last, here's my very last comment. I really think that whatever we choose to do long-term, whether it's through ClearGov and can be more easily updated, there has to be enough data to show revenue projections and expense projections for a few years in order to make tough choices at next town meeting. That means now we have to take whatever tool we can, if that's a spreadsheet, whether it's the Collins with a few things we just ignore, or Jillian's, last one from 2019 or 2020. We got to use that tool in the next few months to have a robust conversation at the February meeting and really be prepared to present to the town voters a summary that they can digest somehow well ahead of the town meeting in May. That's my 2 cents.
Bob, many cents, great sense though. Bob, could you send that Stowe art thing you were talking about? Because I'm not sure. I don't think I sent it to the FinCom if I did get it, and I wasn't able to just find it real quick. So could you just send that to me and I can send that along?
I will. And, all I want to do is caution that take it with a grain of salt. It's 7 pages of what they put together. I'm not saying it's the model.
No,
but
absolutely.
It's certainly more than we do. And what I like the best about it is it's comparing revenues against against expenditures that you're going to be voting on in that meeting.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice to see a little bit more context than we typically give the voters?
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, I'll definitely send it along.
Thanks.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks again, Danielle. Great work.
Thank you.
Katie, see your hand up. Go ahead.
I put my hand up. So along those lines, giant kudos to Danielle, and that took a lot of time to put together. And on that note, how much, when we're looking at this model, and Lori, you've worked with this before, it sounds like in another town, how many hours per week even does it take to keep up this? Is it a time intense kind of suck, or is it, something that you could pick on, for a few hours each month? Or is it?
Depends. We only updated it once a year in Townsend. It was, we didn't use it to its full extent. We didn't use all the tabs it had because, again, like you're saying, it's extremely cumbersome. There's a lot of data in there. But we did update the revenues and expenditures. Like I said, before we'd start our budget season, we would have, at least the revenues, expenditures, and certain things up to date, the debt schedules and that sort of thing. It depends on how many people are working on it, or if just one person's doing it all. Like I said, ours was a little bit different. Our budget was about half the size. So when it came to updating like the omnibus budget part, I think that's the most labor intensive, is updating the omnibus, because ours actually did all roll up to the summary page. So if you change something there, it rolled up to the summary page, which was extremely useful because you could see, your expenditures and your revenues balance out. So like I said, it all depends on which way everybody wants to go. But to clarify, the operational budgeting platform we're using from ClearGov this year is only meant for the town staff right now. That is something for the town staff to enter into and for Greg and I to work on the budget. We're not ready for it to be anything more than that this year. Everybody's just actually training tomorrow. The department heads are all training tomorrow to learn how to use it. And from there, we don't even know what its forecasting feature looks like. So it sounds like everybody's looking to have something done for this year. And we definitely won't be ready for that for ClearGov. Maybe in the future, if we find like once we're done with the budget and Greg and I can start playing around with it and seeing what it can do, we might be able to use that in the future. But for this year, if everybody wants to use the Collins Center, we'll work really hard and get that updated as quickly as possible. Or if we want to go back to the higher level spreadsheet that Jillian and Bob created, that would be fine too. And we can get that updated.
Okay.
Sorry to jump in real quick. I have to go, but I just want to let you know I'm more than willing to help in taking the load off others and work with Laurie or whomever, Jillian, anybody else that would like to, and Danielle, to do it for this coming fiscal year, because I think, a little bit is good enough. We don't have to have it be a perfect tool in order to be able to utilize it well in terms of having good discussions on priority decision making. All right, but I got to run.
Thank you, Bob.
So thank you all.
We appreciate that. We will probably be talking to you, Bob.
I hope you do. All right, that'll be fine. All right,
Yeah.
Take care,
Okay.
everybody. All right,
Good night.
bye-bye. Good night.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so it sounds like Greg has already made the decision to go with ClearGov as for the future of the finances. That being said, I would strongly encourage the town to echo Bob's comments. I would strongly encourage the town, strongly encourage Lori to give the FinCom committee early access to the tool. Admittedly, it's not perfect. Admittedly, it's not going to be an official document, but I think we should start acclimating ourselves to the tool, start being able to see what the tool can do, and to be able to give our feedback to Greg to say like, oh, hey, this practice works, this practice doesn't work. But I really think like I would really push for FinCom to have like early visibility into this tool for this fiscal year, really echoing what Bob said.
Well, right now, it's not a tool for use for forecasting at all. It's a budget tool. It's going to make our budgeting process more efficient. Right now, department heads are entering into our financial software, SoftWrite, and then we're taking that information, the expenditures, and putting it into a spreadsheet. And we go back and forth between looking at SoftWrite documents and making adjustments there on paper to going back in, adjusting it in the software, adjusting it on the spreadsheet. That's what we're trying to cut down on with the operational budgeting platform right now, is we can do it all in one spot and not be printing reports, slashing numbers, changing, and then changing it in a spreadsheet. That's really what it's meant for this fiscal year. And that's why it's more for just internal use. We don't know what the forecasting capabilities are, or if we'll even want to use them.
Okay.
That we may decide that, these spreadsheets, the Collins Center is, much more useful for committees or even for ourselves. We just don't even know what that is right now. So there's really nothing for you to play with,
Okay.
to look at.
What is interesting though is you mentioned SoftWrite.
Mhm.
So is that actually the town system of record? Is
Yes,
SoftWrite?
yes.
Okay. So I will put the offer out to this committee. I may be able to learn very quickly how to, provided the town provides this committee read-only access, I may be able to, I'll put before the committee, I could very quickly learn the software for SoftWrite and be able to actually start doing projections off of that if there's a pressing need for it. But I'll put the offer out there before this committee. I feel highly confident that I'll be able to, if we want to go in this direction, I'll be able to learn how to use SoftWrite and be able to do read-only access and to be able to do analysis off of that data.
I don't know what the access availability for SoftWrite is, Lori, if that's even like an option.
I don't understand what you get out of it to forecast. It's our financial software. It doesn't have forecasting abilities.
Yeah,
I think he's just looking at the
Forecast.
data.
We don't even budget our revenues in it. That's why we're using the other budgeting platform.
But if we want to do projections like with Ken's example, if we wanted to see what our out of district cost growth looked like, if I had programmatic access to the data, either through an API, there's probably something with SoftWrite because they're a cloud-based company. If I had access to that financial database, I would be able to download the data, do projections on it, and produce graphs for this committee or other analysis, but graphs
What
would
do
be
you
the simple example.
What is it you're trying to get out of it? Would you say the out of district costs?
Like the out of district education costs.
I think
Like
that's DESI. That's different. That I don't think DESI's expenses feed into the SoftWrite, right? Because it's
No.
different. It would be more like the cherry sheets that you're talking about that might have those on an annual basis, and that is something the state shares of what those assessments are. Not something that we'd have in the budget. So that might be a good place. I know they have dashboards, really great dashboards on the state's website that you might be able to look at those if you're looking to get in, because I don't think we send that type of information to Lori, like for.
No, we don't have that type of background. We get an assessment,
yeah.
one
So-
big number. is
So
all we
here,
get.
here's what I'm trying to get out of it. Right now, you guys are ClearGov's the future. You're translating SoftWrite data into ClearGov. ClearGov is really intended to be kind of this analysis toolbox that lets you do graphs of different costs. But what I hear from you, Lori, is that that's not going to be available to this committee for this fiscal year, even though I would strongly encourage you to make it available to this committee this fiscal year.
Well, like I
in
said, it's
lieu-
just budgeting. It's not for forecasting this fiscal year. We're just using the budgeting module, which then will create a file to pull into SoftWrite. It's not, there's a forecasting feature to it, but we don't even know what it looks like. So that's why we're not making it available. For one, we don't know what it looks like or what it can do. That wasn't our intent when we even purchased it. It was to cut down on the multi-step budgeting process that we're using now. To make it so Greg and I and department heads can collaborate in one spot is what it's meant for. So that's why I don't see, like I said, you're not going to see the data that I think you're thinking you want to see in there or in SoftWrite, because we don't have, like I said, our district costs. Assessments are one lump, one big number. We don't have any breakdown. We're given that number by the state.
ClearGov does a breakdown. So I'll put the URL in the chat window, but ClearGov has a breakdown of out of district costs.
We don't
They
do
get
chat
that
windows.
from DESI. ClearGov pulls that from DESI.
ClearGov pulls that from DESI. Okay.
Yes, they pull that from DESI. Those are not numbers that we give them.
All right. So I would really encourage the town to make ClearGov available to this finance committee, because it's going to be the future, and B, it's an invaluable tool for us to get a handle on, especially those non-discretionary costs.
I will I will let Greg know what your thoughts are.
Danielle, go ahead.
Thanks. So hopping back, I think to some of what Bob was saying, we could potentially leverage parts of the Collins model, as well as if we wanted to, kind of the high level tab that I sat on top of it for this
Mhm.
upcoming fiscal year, without having to make a decision on whether we want to go like all the way down to the very base detail.
Right.
The summary tab in there would probably be pretty useful for us. Even if we wanted to, I mean, it's Excel, we can save out a second version so that we're not blowing away anything. But
Right.
that would allow us to kind of budget at that, kind of high level buckets level and kind of forecast from there, as opposed to going all the way down. That also buys us some time to align with everyone on what we want to use for a potentially more detailed model, but not sacrificing our visibility for this upcoming season. So
Right.
I figured I'd throw out there that we could do that without breaking anything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jillian, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I did also want to sort of bring up, I know it's come up a couple times in conversation here, is that not everything is not all the data is centralized in one database, particularly across the different functions, like, the town government, the schools, and some of the other areas. So I think it makes this forecasting difficult. I think in the past, what the hardest buy-in was, and I know that I'm going to maybe contradict Bob here a little bit, saying, having some type of a tool still might not be necessarily the best. I know he wants to push to have something to get some sort of an idea. And I think in the past, the largest hurdle we had in the discussions was that people focused on the shortcomings of the tools rather than any knowledge that could be gained from them. And I'm not exactly sure where the balance comes for that. I know nothing will be exactly perfect, but, sometimes it might be harder for us to balance, say, the school side, which I know is, an important part of our budgeting process and our town services. There's also a lot of, grants and other things that the school has access to that the town doesn't necessarily have. And I don't know that how that can be forecasted. I just, it's a lot of enigma to me. I don't really understand it personally sometimes. So I think I like the ambition of having these plans. And I think, for the town side, it might be a little easier to figure out. But I think for some of our, the largest cost driver of the budget is the schools. Some of it is difficult. And, there's those, I forget what the term that we used earlier was, the things that you can't predict for. So like the special education funding, there's, I think, some things that can be difficult there. So just to throw that up.
Yeah, no, those are good points. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, just, I think I find myself sort of in between what Jillian was saying and what Bob was saying. I think we need to have some sort of planning tool for us to be able to say, as a finance committee, that the budget that is being proposed makes sense not only for the coming fiscal year, but its implications and impacts on, on where we're going in future years. And so there are some things around, capital set-asides and so forth that, that we should, I think we need to be in a position to be able to advocate on. So I'm probably not seeing it quite as urgent as Bob is suggesting that it is. I find myself a little closer to Jill's point, but I do think we have a responsibility to say to town meeting voters, this is good not only for the coming year, but here are the implications for the out years as well. So.
Mm-hmm. I think I find myself wanting sort of a list of what it is that we want to see on any given tool, or we could even go a little bit more immediate, what we would like to see before, our February meeting. and then say, where could we get this? What is going to give this to us? Because when we talk about things like, I would like to see things that we have to get the information from DESI versus things that we have the information from Lori versus, and I don't even, some of these things I'm not even sure that I would know exactly, like, oh, I want to look at this over the last 5 years. Who owns that data? And I think that's sometimes where it can get very confusing and where some of the breakdown happens in usable tools. So would it be possible for us to think about that and actually get a, here is what we would like to look at and over these years, and then kind of go from there and say, okay, the Collins model could give us that if we updated these tabs, or we need to pull data from here and we need a new something to do it. Does that make sense?
Well, that's what I tried to lay out by saying, I'm trying to acknowledge the fact that Lori, is ultimately the one who's going to be responsible for making sure, for ensuring the integrity of the data. And so we're not going to be the ones to be, inputting, the actuals and stuff. And so I, just as one member of the committee, I would tend to defer to her in terms of, in terms of, what tool is going to feed into the actuals. Now, we don't need the detailed, quite, again, in my opinion, just one person's opinion, I think we need the detail at that, 8 or 9, main account levels. We don't need the detail, necessarily deeper than that. Again, just one person. What we're supposed to do is be able to take a look at revenue trends, past to future, and expenditure trends past into the future, and say, revenues that the town has coming in are going to be sufficient to do the things that we need it to do. And we've had some, issues around around infrastructure and around funding the schools, and that we haven't always been, and capital more generally. And so I don't see how we can sit here and assure the town meeting voters that revenue and expenditure trends will be sufficient to handle infrastructure, schools, et cetera, unless we have those trend lines. We don't need the detail, but we do need, on that 8 level. So again, what I said earlier, one tool that we all use gets updated primarily through Lori and others in the town. 5 years in the past to 5 years going into the future at the level of the 8 counts, that we can draw out data and put together graphical representations to allow town meeting voters to understand the trends a little bit better than, I mean, some of us are used to looking at tabular, spreadsheets and stuff like that. It's probably not a big issue, but for town meeting voters, it's more difficult. And then flexible enough to allow us to run scenarios. That to me is the minimum criteria. If the tool doesn't accomplish that, then it's not a useful tool for us to have discussions about past into future trends.
Right. And I agree with that usable tool. But one of the data points that, Kevin was talking about, and Lori was like, well, that's not my data point. And it's Desi's data point, or it's this person's data point. So that's my point was, yes, on the town side and in the categories that we are used to looking at town meeting, et cetera, is mainly, a Lori and a town hall thing. But there are things that we are interested in potentially looking at that wouldn't necessarily be that. And so my thought was, if one of the things we want to look at moving forward is something that needs to be gathered from the, from the school department, from Wayne, or from Desi, or from, something on the water enterprise from Justin, that would just be something we need to know, like, if this is one of the things we are interested in looking at a regular basis, that we know where that's coming from. Natasha, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering, because I've just been hearing a lot of these great conversations, and Danielle, I really appreciate the work you were doing. My two takeaways in hearing the discussions are, one, everyone's level of understanding is not exactly the same. And so there's this education piece of what is the data, like everyone's needs of what they're trying to learn more about might be at a different place. So I almost wonder if there's like an opportunity for a survey. You talked about the boards, like everyone, what are the expenses you would like to see? What are the revenue pieces you would like to, what are the areas? And then once you can kind of get that, you could see where everyone's, some of that Lori can, best answer, like, this is not something that would be found in this tool, or this is something that, that would kind of like educate, okay, this is where we find that type of information. And also to see if ClearGov would even meet that type of forecasting or budgeting, in the future, if that's the tool that's going to be used. So I think everyone has a desire for different aspects, but not everyone understands what information is expected to be coming out of the tool, or where we find that. So I don't know if that would be a helpful thought, just to like a survey for everyone. What are you looking for in a budgeting and forecasting tool? And then just kind of take it from there to help inform the discussions.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
So yeah, I think so. Some of us on the committee, so I've written accounting software. I know how to write SQL queries. So my needs would be as raw data as possible. Again, I've done data analysis before, so I am pretty comfortable just going from raw data to like charts and graphs and producing like reports. So as far as my needs go, like if I had access to the raw data, I would be satisfied. I would need like the analysis, like the clear benefit, like the benefit of ClearGov for me is its ability to pull from disparate data sets, to pull from Desi, to pull from the town's financial information and put it all together. I browsed ClearGov before. If they just had like a data download, that would pretty much meet my needs as far as like being able to produce charts and graphs and be able to project, especially those non-discretionary costs.
So I appreciate the fact, Kevin, that you can do this. But the point is that you're not the town accountant. You're a member of the finance committee, and we have certain responsibilities. Our responsibilities are to town meeting voters. And you're one member of a multi-member committee. And so the committee as a whole works to decide how it's going to make its decisions. And so the fact that you as an individual member, or me as an individual member, is interested in particular information doesn't necessarily mean that that's the direction that we should be going. We should, as a committee, be getting together and deciding what information that we need and conveying that as a committee decision. Okay. And so I appreciate the fact that you as an individual can do that. But that is something for the committee as a whole to make a decision about.
Okay, so in terms of wrapping up this discussion just for this evening, and steps moving forward, because that's what I like to focus on. I think we are still narrowing down on some functionality and some specific areas that we want to be sure we can see and look at. And so would it be helpful if perhaps, I don't know how to collate that sort of what I'm thinking of, but if everyone wants to send me what they are, like which data points they feel are the most helpful or the most necessary, and then I can put that together, and then we can see who, we can look at the Collins model, we can look at where else we would need to get this data from, if it's not going to be in there, if it's going to be data that has to get pulled from DESI, if it's going to be, what have you. And then we can
I
sort
think
of,
that'd be a good starting point. I
yeah,
think that'd be a very good starting point for us as a committee to express. And then if you convey that to Lori
right,
and sort of say, Lori, based on your knowledge of the tools, whether it's the, Collins model, the old FinCom model, whether it's something new, whether it's ClearGov, whatever it is,
right,
what is the best way? The budgeting software that she uses to manage, the next year's budget is not what we're looking for. We're not looking at that level of detail. But I think us conveying as members of the committee, and we're all on here, so we could all
right,
convey those. And maybe even you solicit Bob's input from perspective of somebody who has been struggling with these questions as well, and
right,
then collate that, convey it to Lori, give Lori a chance to talk with Greg and respond back. I do agree with Jill that we're probably in this for the longer term, and we may not be able to get quite the rigorous model that Bob would like to have for the coming year. But I do think that we need to have something. So I like your idea, Lana.
okay. So obviously the simple or the basic ones would be the categories that are presented at annual town meeting, right? That's something we're always looking at, something that is going to be seen. So there's that.
So expenses as functional segments is what you're looking for?
Yeah, and revenue.
Okay.
So there is a big caveat with our revenue growth in the terms of our water supply. That may be a trend breaking factor that we may need to go into more detail on. Because that water supply, as has been testified before by, I believe, by both Greg and Justin, that water supply is now a limiting factor to our growth. So I do think to do our projection, we are probably going to have to do a detailed drill down into that revenue, into that revenue source for, I guess, at least residential based revenue. I don't know what in terms of commercial, we have vacant lots, so commercial we may be able to just extrapolate the trend, but for residential, which is heavily dependent on the water supply, I think we may need to do a detailed drill down on.
Okay.
I believe Justin has a consultant that works on that, the revenue forecasting. We have consultants that do that.
Okay.
And in terms of other, so what I'm basically looking for is things that you may go to this tool for specific, like for example, and this is one of those ones that again isn't a budget, is hard to budget for, so it's not necessarily to look at that. But if we're looking at trends, our special education spending might be one of them. Like if you wanted to go and see so that we can, see what we've had to do in the past, see where it's potentially might be going in the future, see how much it fluctuates even,
Mhm.
things like that. So special education spending, again, that's one where Lori would be like, you know, you have to go to this person for that or something.
Well,
I
it comes
think
out of multiple expenditure accounts, multiple funds.
Yeah, we've not gotten into those, as Lori is saying, this comes out of multiple things. We've not
Right.
typically used the model to track to that level. Now, certainly in our conversation with the school committee has often said, hey, look, we're seeing trends go this way or what have you, but that's part of the discussion outside of the model. Or at least in the
Okay.
past it has been.
Right, and in some of their funds, like on the school side, they use a different software than the town does. And then there is a crosswalk that crosses over.
Right.
There's somewhat 200 expenditure accounts down to, I think we have 15 or 16 on our side. So to get any, I guess, in-depth data that I think Kevin's looking for, he would need to look to the school side to get the detail, because I don't even have their detail. My side, I have 15 lines and that's it. They have
Right.
200.
I think Wayne would be the person to talk to, right, Natasha?
If there's specific information, I would say probably don't reach out to him directly. If there's something particular, you can maybe let me know. Desi has a lot of that special education stuff that might be easy if you're looking for trends, that it'll
Right.
talk about like teachers at a district, in district, like a lot of those different buckets that Lori was talking about that are different than what the town would have on their expenditure size, but it's based on like the year end, mostly like the year end reports, and then it kind of gets updated annually. So let me know
No,
what you're looking for.
all right, I will
Well, that's
reach
what
out.
I'm trying to brainstorm here. I'm trying to see what it is we might be
All right.
looking for.
So
Right.
Natasha would be the contact person for this, for the school information, I imagine. So I guess this is a question for both Lori and Natasha. What about the benefits tied to school staff? Does that information live on Lori's side, or does that live on the school side? Because we kind of do this weird thing where we like split
Yeah.
out the benefits and we pool every town employee's benefits together under one account. So that's a
Right.
little bit difficult to distangle.
Well, actually, that would probably be data that would be found within HR and our benefits coordinator, because on my side, on the ledger, all you're gonna see is the monthly payment hit.
Okay.
You don't know what makes up that monthly payment, who makes up that. I mean, I get reports as we're processing payments, but I'm not getting list of exactly who is on it and every single cost. That is coming through HR and our benefits coordinator. So they would have more of the numbers as to the breakdown. I think Stephanie had done a breakdown before for us, and it was probably, I think, upwards of 70% school to 30% town when you looked at the health insurance bills. But again, that's not something you're going to pull from the financial software, the general ledger. That's more detail behind the scenes from HR.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
is it the same benefit cost per employee?
Yes,
No.
depending on the plan they pick. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's dependent on what they pick. Like some people have
Right.
family plans, some people might have, so it's not the same.
Okay. It's
It
heterogeneous.
depends on what they select.
Right, HMO, PPO, single family, that sort of thing. But it's the single on the town side is the same cost as the single on the school side.
I mean,
Yeah.
it probably, we'd have to make an assumption there, but the assumption would be is that town staff on average, make the same choices as school staff. And I mean, that's an assumption. I would probably document it. That's probably how we could disentangle the benefits
Mhm.
between town and school. Just by head count and just assuming on average it evens out.
Sorry,
Right, I think
Kevin,
they have,
can
I
you
mean, they might
clarify
have more
why?
granular detail, but I don't have that on my side.
Okay.
Yeah.
You won't see that in the ledgers.
What were you gonna say, Danielle?
Sorry, I'm just wondering what are we trying to get with that level of detail?
So there are certain non-discretionary costs that in the past we have seen growing exponentially. Special education, out of district placement, infrastructure. All these things are exhibiting exponential growth at a rate that far exceeds the overall growth in the town budget. So these things are growing faster than our budget is growing. So what that means is that over time, those items which are growing faster than the overall budget are going to take up more and more of the budget as a percentage basis. And
Yeah, I
so
guess I'm just not understanding why differentiating between school and town for benefits would give us any additional clarity if they're the same rates, and we would assume that over time, you know, if population grows, staffing would grow, things like that. It seems, I'm not understanding why the detailed assumptions would change what we would expect for the future for benefits.
because because the staff, the certain expenditures like special education staff are growing faster than the rest of the staff.
Like the town side staff.
Than the town side staff. I think the town side
Okay.
staff has stayed relatively fixed, and I think we've had an increase in special education staff.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're careful to focus on what's material too,
Yeah.
because every report that we're having town staff pull, if we don't expect it's going to have a material impact on the overall projections, I just want to make sure we're cognizant of that, because
Mhm.
I think making an overall staffing assumption that staffing will grow over time, absolutely. But if we're going to get into like what a single plan costs versus a family plan, that's
I'm
probably,
not looking at that level of detail. I'm just doing a gross average of like, here's the benefits and here's the salary. So the school has the issue is the school has the salary growth, but the school accounting system doesn't have the benefits growth. So I have to go
Yeah.
see like what I would do is go see what the average benefit cost is per person, assuming like each, and then multiply it by the growth in the head count of the school.
okay.
Or just by doing a ratio of like salary to benefits and multiplying it by the salary growth, depending on what information is available.
Lori, doesn't Maya, don't they provide that growth every year? That's part of our every year budgeting, right? They give us that percentage of growth.
They give
That-
us what the cost increase is over the average plan.
Right.
So
So that
they'll-
number is easy to get if we're looking at a high level. But like if you're to Kevin's point, you know, without getting too in the weeds, we do have that number, which I think I would be cautious about what information you're trying to get about families and stuff, because then you get into like HIPAA and whatever. So I mean, just that percentage of growth of expense on an annual basis seems easier to obtain and monitor. Like the out of district cost, transportation, like, you know, those type of high level things we're talking about, inflation, utilities. I think those are the trackers that we probably would want to look at historical trends. And also, Danielle, which I really liked on your tool, we look at free cash, right? How is that also showing in comparison? Is there any correlation where we've, you know, have years of more free cash and we've, you know, under budgeted, and is there some areas that have been too conservative that have related to that? So I think those are the pieces that I think for me would be helpful to see how we're forecasting and informing future discussions in the immediate versus in the future, our wish list of what a perfect option would look like, right? Because I think there's two different situations here.
The other area that I think needs a detailed drill down is medium term capital expenditures, and that's probably would be like a Justin thing to get Justin to ask Justin like what of our infrastructure needs work on that's going to require, that is either going to fail or require like a lot of maintenance, there's a money pit, or that's going to require a significant capital expenditure down the road in the next like 5 years.
Well, we do have, on that note, we do have the Capcom coming at
Yeah.
our next meeting to have some of that discussion.
So I think what would the request be would be like a state of the facilities report from either the capital committee or from Justin. I imagine first the capital committee, but I'll also maybe consider asking Justin that. But from there, we could do a drill down into like, okay, you know, there's a $200,000 expenditure here, $400,000 expenditure here, and then add those individual items to like our general, for the most part, everything would be just like general, like fixed percentage growth, but then we add these like bespoke, like medium term items in.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that would be helpful in when, having a really good usable model is when we look at where we can fit in things. I think part of what I struggle with is keeping in my head where large debts are coming in, where large debts are dropping off.
Mhm.
And so, and looking in terms of like, okay, we know we have, say, a large piece of equipment or something like a new fire truck or something that we need. And historically, what often seems to end up happening is like, well, push it off till it's, push it off till we can just fit it in somewhere. And I think it would be great to be able to look a couple years ahead and say, you know what, this we're paying off, let's say, total examples, but the high school is going to be paid off that year. So this debt is going to come off. And so that might be a good year to throw that debt we know is coming in, like that kind of thing would be really helpful for me. So where, I guess a question would be, where in this model would we be able to see that?
There's a debt schedule in the Collins model.
In the
It's
Collins
not
one.
updated. I have an updated schedule that we just supplied to the capital planning committee because they were
Mhm.
going to be incorporating it into whatever model they're working on. Yeah,
Okay, so the debt schedule, that's
yes, that one, the
something
one that's in the
that's something
forecast
that I
is
would
not
want to see.
updated
Okay.
because we've done multiple refundings and the fire station's not on that model. I don't
Right.
believe.
Mhm.
So Lori, did I hear you correctly? The capital planning committee has their own model that they're working with?
They are, I haven't seen it, but it's not a forecasting tool. It's a capital planning tool that they
Okay.
have built. It is something
Okay.
they chose to do on their own. They did ask for the debt schedules so they could see too when debt was falling off.
Oh, good.
Again, this feeds into Ken, but ideally, like long term, we
Mhm,
would get all this information centralized onto one
mhm.
tool. I mean, probably,
Yeah.
again, it's probably too ambitious to get it this fiscal year, but like, I think the spirit of it is we want to get every single committee using like
Right.
one centralized
Mhm.
financial database or data store that we can see all
Right.
this instead of having to like go around asking everyone for it.
Right, or at least one that we can be, I imagine that I think part of the issue is that trap that you can fall into when you try to have something do everything
Mhm.
and then it doesn't do anything particularly well. You know what I mean? So on the one hand, there are potentially, and I don't, obviously we can talk to Capcom about what it is they've built because I haven't seen it, but like potentially there may be certain bits that break off and have their own modeling or tool or tracking that we, that we can look at that then informs on certain things, because maybe, trying to be able to look at one, spreadsheet, workbook, or database that does all of the things that we're sort of thinking of isn't entirely realistic. And part of the thing that works so well to have like a separate committee like Capcom is so that the FinCom isn't tracking everything that Capcom is, what I'm saying, like that's why we separate certain things. And so, another example might be the CPC, because they have like their whole section. And while I would like to look at it and know where it's going and know what they're doing, they may still own that particular section or piece.
I mean, that's fine, Alana. Why I'm more thinking of like is just like either like a shared Google Drive or a shared network drive where all these spreadsheets are uploaded and there's a common directory that people can go and navigate and say like, oh, I have to do this. For example, I have to do this cost forecast. let me go and look at the capital planning committee's
Yeah.
debt spreadsheet. And so that way we don't have to like constantly be like reaching out and bouncing emails off each other. And I mean, the biggest
Yeah.
challenge we have is that all our financial information is like very heavily siloed. And
Yeah.
the left hand, and what happens when you have siloed data like this is that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
And I think part of the vision, likely when we purchased board docs, was that it would potentially fill some of that gap. More in terms, I think, of maybe not so much just like raw data type things, but in terms of like, oh, what's the, you know, what's the select board doing? What's the FinCom doing? What's select, you know, let's go look at all of their agendas, all their minutes, all their, you know, that kind of data for people to be able to go and access. But unfortunately, you know, sometimes it is hard to get, especially with volunteer committees that are all, you know, doing their own thing, getting them to all have buy-in and feed into like one system is very challenging.
So maybe one way I would volunteer to help out the effort here is maybe I browse board docs and I put together a document that has the URLs for all this financial information, like the URL for the capital planning committee's debt schedule, the URL for DPW's projected infrastructure spend for the next 5 years, if it exists.
If it was on there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just throwing out examples, but I think one of the ways I could help out is like putting together just a index or a reference sheet for all the financial information that I could find, and I would email it to this committee, and we could put it on board docs so that people could very easily, without having to do a lot of digging or recreating the digging that I've done, be able to access this financial information, and from there we could start putting together these projections and these planning tools.
Right. And I think that's part of my wanting to sort of have a central idea of the things that we would really like to be able to see, so that we know what already exists and what doesn't really exist yet, or is, you know, lives somewhere other that we have to go and get.
So what I propose to do is like everyone go off on their own, but like Alana, you put together that list of what people want, you email us that list, and then we email back just to you like the URL of what we were able to find, and then you could put that together. I know I'm volunteering you for work, but I think this is the way we work with open meeting laws. But you know, I'll email you every URL that I find regarding everyone's wish list.
Well, I think at first we need to make the wish list.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do, but we may, in the interest of time and whatnot, I may just ask that you can all email me anything particular that you want to make sure is on that. So other than the obvious, which is, like I said, the categories that we see every year at annual town meeting. We've already talked about a debt schedule. So, but other things that's on your mind that we should be really making sure that we are looking at. I think what was the other out of district and charter schools was one of them. So yeah, I would love some input from everyone in email, and then we can put together our wish list, and then we can go from there on where we can find these things, where we can't find these things, and then it'll inform our modeling. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. I think that was a good discussion, and I'm looking forward to moving forward on some of these things, and hopefully getting having a good presentation to be able to deliver as we historically do at the budget meeting in February. So moving on in our agenda, I just wanted to touch on some preliminary budget season preparation, which honestly, a lot of this discussion was kind of in that same idea, but I know that it tends to go fast once the holidays hit and everything. So February, is it the second Saturday in February we do that? Or is it the first? I have to go back and look, but in February, we'll have the
We
big,
have to do it by the 15th.
by the 15th, okay. We will have our large budget meeting between the select board and the finance committee. We also invite the school committee and various heads of departments to that. At that point, Greg usually has a working budget model going, and he presents that. And the finance committee historically also gives a budget presentation or some sort of presentation that we would like to have out in the world for discussion. So this model that we're sort of going for is definitely going to play heavily into that presentation likely. And in terms of our budget preparation, normally we also meet with department heads. I believe their budgets are due to Greg sort of at the beginning of the year, right, Lori? Sorry, you're on mute.
I believe Greg gave them till December 5th to have them entered into, to have them submitted.
Okay, oh, so that soon.
Mhm.
Okay. So after departments have their,
So
And
as a reminder.
Yeah.
The departments submit it to Greg, and then there are
Right.
discussions between Greg and Lori on the one hand and the department
Right.
heads in terms of, and what he's working towards is a budget that needs to be forwarded. I'm gonna say in the January. I'll have to look at the deadlines here.
yeah,
Also, the school committee won't be voting on ours until December 15th. So that one will be forwarded as soon as it's voted on.
okay. And then after that, we tend to have meetings with department heads about their budgets and, have discussions with them throughout the fall or throughout the winter and early spring.
Alana, is it
Yeah.
possible that the school committee, can I email you about getting us, because we were looking at early January to get on your schedule?
Absolutely.
Okay. Like around the January, I don't know if you're meeting on January 9th or ish, but somewhere
Hang on, let
around
me go
that
look.
date.
We'll go look right now. Yeah, we would have a meeting January 9th and January 23rd right now.
Okay. So I'll send you an email and then
Sure.
one of those dates, be great to pencil a school committee in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it gets, it's always a little bit of a crunch with, holidays and then the new year, and then we're into
Yeah.
the budget meeting,
Well,
and it's a lot.
We try to do like a budget like schedule for us to keep everybody on
Okay.
track because there are a lot.
Right.
And you were, getting you guys confirmed is on that next
Sure.
place, because I know that the school has met, Brian has met with the CAPSCOM a couple of
Oh, good.
times already. So yeah, so they've had some conversations, but I just want to make sure we reserve a space with you as well.
Great. I'm going to make a note of that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's kind of I guess in the budget season preparation, or we could save it to member updates. I also just wanted to touch on our budget subcommittee members and just ask you all if there was anything in the last meeting or so that you know has come up that seems like a big hot topic or an item that we should be considering in this budget. I know it's very early in the season, but
So I think I forwarded you the documents from the last meeting we had.
yeah, did
and our
those
next
come?
meeting?
You did, and I thought I had sent what Greg sent to me too, because he usually sends them to me too. But I'll make sure that they all got forwarded to the committee.
So I just, Lana, I just found the calendar. So the the capital planning committee has to prepare a capital improvements plan and submit it to the town administrator by January 1. So that's probably something that we want to put on. We typically meet with school committee and DPW as well. It's not that we don't meet with the other departments, but those are usually the larger ones. By January 1, Greg is supposed to have submitted his on or before the 21st. He is supposed to have submitted his budget, and so certainly by the 23rd, he would be able to go over that with us. And so and that
January, yep.
You're right. And the
Yep.
reason why that is important is presuming that we're meeting on the 11th, because it has to be by the 15th, we wouldn't be meeting until the 13th.
Correct.
And
Yeah, I see what
unless
you're
we
saying.
had an additional,
Yep.
no, we have in past years had an additional
Yeah.
meeting in January. But my point is that so the joint budget review between the select board and the finance committee has to happen by the 15th. So that would be
Right.
presumably by the 11th.
Yeah.
I think in past years, Greg has wanted as much time between when he has to submit the comprehensive budget
hmm
by January 21st and when he has to talk about it at the joint budget review.
Yeah.
So,
That's a good point in that looking at calendars, if we meet January 9th, January 23rd, we may want to bump our meeting that would generally be February 13th to February 6th in order to have, because a meeting, preparing for the large joint budget meeting is going to be a lot more useful than a meeting 2 days after it, most likely.
correct.
So,
And we've done what you suggested in
yeah.
previous years. So
that
that would certainly be that would certainly, that's what we've done in previous years, and it certainly
Right.
would be my preference.
Yeah, I think that is likely. So if everyone can plan for, so just to look at the next few meetings that we will be having, would be November 28th, and we have the Capcom coming. Now they will not have their full budget document ready. That is for January, but the thought of having them in a little earlier is actually to discuss with them how they're going about it, what their process is, where they're at, what's keeping them up at night, what are the big ticket items as we're moving forward, so that we have that in our heads as we move forward with discussions and things. Then we would have a meeting December 12th. We generally do not meet the week between Christmas and New Year's. What? And then have,
Generally, I don't think we ever.
and then, so that would bring us to January 9th, which is likely, we will be sure, you know, it's likely going to be when we start meeting, as we've said, with probably the school committee, and other large departments, and the 23rd. And then
The 23rd, I think,
would be for Greg, most
well, and
likely.
I think that's what you'd want to talk
Yeah.
with Greg and Lori.
I'll talk with Greg about that, yeah.
Right. So,
So we know we've got school committee, Greg's budget. We may see another department in there as well, if, as we think we might need. And then to have a meeting on February 6th instead of February 13th. In preparation, assuming that the budget meeting will be February 11th.
well, and that's probably something that if we could, I realize that that's a ways off, but it probably is important to get on everybody's
Oh yeah,
calendar and so
Yep.
forth. So,
yep. I will confirm on that. So, it sounds like it's far away, but it is really not very many meetings away, to put together, a decent, budget message. So somewhere in there with meeting with, the school committee and Greg and et cetera, we need to also have us as a committee, make sure we have what we would like to present.
well, this is where the model would be helpful. And
Right.
again, recognizing that's not going to happen this year.
Right.
We should probably individually and then through you collectively start to talk about what we see as being issues. And obviously
Right.
the meetings with, hopefully we could get DPW on,
Yeah.
talking with them.
Yep.
They would be one I would think we'd want to talk to. School committee, obviously in January, but
Mhm.
we need to start fleshing out what our message is going to be.
Yep. All right. Yeah, that's helpful.
Did you want me to continue with updates, or we still want to talk about scheduling?
No, sorry. Please continue with updates.
So I think some of the big things that we talked about were revenue planning. So I think it should have been sent around. There's like a different 3 and 5 year revenue planning spreadsheet, which is like completely
Okay.
separate from the projection models that we talked about tonight, is my
Okay.
understanding. And we talked a lot about that, and the split tax rate also came up. So
Mhm.
right now the tax rate is different between businesses and homes. And I think there's been some discussion about this in the past at the board of the select board. Potentially trying to make the town more attractive to businesses, but that would put more stress on residents potentially. So I think they were talking about trying to understand that, and also how when we get reimbursements back, like Medicare or Medicaid, how those things are, where that money goes, what funds it goes into, depending on what like departments it came from. So like, for example, if it was in school employees, like would that refund be split between the school and the town? Or where does that go? I think those were sort of the 3 main topics that I recall from the meeting.
Okay. That's helpful. The tax rate, that's a big discussion. That's definitely that would be a huge shift.
Yes.
Hmm.
I can't recall how it actually came up. I think we were talking about revitalizing and getting more businesses to get more tax revenue.
Right.
And that was something that came up.
Is there any good data on towns with split versus not, and if in fact,
Yeah.
it's so hard because they're
So that was one of the, yeah, that was one of the spreadsheets that Greg sent
Okay.
to us. So it had all of the sort of similar or surrounding towns that, oh goodness, I'm blanking on his name from the select board.
Jeff.
Jeff,
He made a
yeah.
spreadsheet.
Yep.
Yeah, he made a spreadsheet comparing like us to other towns and what we're most financially similar to, and if they have
Okay.
split tax rates or not.
Mhm.
I think I forwarded that to you, but if I didn't,
Okay.
please let me know. And I will.
All right, I will go back and check. Yes, okay, so I believe I did forward that to everyone on Friday, November 4th at 11:30. The levies and tax Maynard Piers, something like that. Okay.
Yeah. So I
Um,
mean, I think that would be a very big discussion.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm not sure how serious that is being explored. The impression I got was that it's more of something to talk about, but probably not
Right.
something that will actually happen. But it's like sort of a theoretical exercise.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Question for Jillian.
Mhm.
So Jillian, is this just at the early stages, like it's just chatter at this point, or have they hired consultants to calculate what the revenue impact of this would be?
So I think it was something that might have been more seriously discussed in the past when I wasn't members of this committee. It sounded like something that happened at the select board some time ago. I think one of the business people in the town tried to bring it forward through some kind of a town article. I don't know if Peter or Ken, if you recall any of that, but that was the impression I got from the call last week.
Because I mean that if the select board were to approve that split tax rate, that would have enormous impact on the revenue projections. It would upend.
Yep.
Again, that would be what I said, that would be a trend breaking event, for which we could no longer just do a constant percentage increase in revenues. I mean, we already have
Well, so it's not that it would change the revenues. It would change the percentage of revenues that is driven by residential property taxes versus commercial taxes. Okay, so the same amount of revenue would presumably have to be would still be gathered. It's just that it would end up falling more heavily. And that's one of the reasons why there's been so much resistance to that, knowing that, while, I mean, I think there are, people talk all the time about, wouldn't it be great to attract businesses to Maynard? And, this is something that they look at. I have yet to get a sense that that's really factoring into people's decisions on whether to come to Maynard versus to go right across the line to Acton or Concord or what have you.
Yeah, that was sort of my point on the data. Where's the data that says, whether or not that's the case? I would be interested in for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if this is going to be a topic of discussion, I do think this should be on our agenda. If this is going to be a proposal coming before town meeting, I don't know how far it sounds like it's just preliminary talk at this point, but I think it's
just preliminary talk.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's that I believe tomorrow night the select board is
Yeah.
setting the tax rate.
Right.
So it'll be discussion there, always comes up, can't be, I mean, most of the business community can't reduce the variance, the difference in the tax rate. And mostly it's generally is, it would fall so heavily on residents that the select board doesn't get rid of the split and doesn't change the allocation that dramatically either. I mean, if we're taking away from commercial property, then falls on residents. So I think it's going to come up. I think the tax rate gets set tonight. So that'll be the meeting that does it. It'll be over for a year.
And my understanding is that some people on the call felt that the split tax rate was still attractive because it incentivizes the businesses to fill the buildings they have to offset the costs. And if you set the same as a resident tax rate, then it might not be as, that was one of the things that came up. I don't know how true that is, but.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, if we had a functioning real estate market, that you should not have a vacant lot. Like
There are a lot of reasons why properties are vacant in Maynard, and a broken real estate market is, that can't be traced that, because frankly this has been going on long before COVID for many years. And so in particular properties in the downtown. So we had talked previously about, some towns have a vacant, have a higher, have higher taxes on vacant properties than, Revere is a good example of that, in order to recognize the additional costs associated with vacant properties.
I mean,
Yeah.
If this is a concern, I would do a deep dive into tax policy. But again, like, you shouldn't be having vacant lots if things are working correctly. I mean, that's kind of a supply shortage, which in a perfectly functioning market, you would not have either a supply shortage or a demand shortage, that the price would either raise or lower to be able to meet that. But
All right,
I mean,
I'm going to bring the conversation back to, I think we're getting off on some tangents here, and it's, I just want to focus a little bit. But was there anything else, Peter? Thank you, Jillian, for that. And I will go back and check and make sure everybody got from that meeting all the documents. But was there anything else on your mind from the meeting, Peter?
I missed the meeting. No, I
Oh.
missed the meeting, so I
Okay.
didn't have to report on it.
No problem. No problem. Okay. So get my train of thought back here. Why don't we move into our routine agenda? I think that's sort of mostly our budget preparation. Yeah, Natasha, go ahead.
I just wanted I think I had emailed you or just right before the meeting started, but as for an awareness, tomorrow the school committee is meeting with the select board as a joint meeting regarding bleacher discussions.
Yep.
And I hadn't seen that FinCom had either provided or had been solicited a recommendation regarding the direction to take. So it was more just a question first, because it got brought up at the last town budget subcommittee meeting very briefly, because the information from the engineer had just come in, and there had been a lot of quick meetings between the town administrator and Brian before wanting to take a vote on action. So that was a question, I guess, is if there's anything that had been raised with FinCom or shared by FinCom that would be important to factor in for the school committee, at least, to be aware of.
We had not been asked formally I guess, for tomorrow night's meeting. I will be attending tomorrow night's meeting, just as liaison, but
Okay.
unless I missed something, I don't think we were specifically solicited. And I guess my thought on that is that the select board and the school committee were in the process of sort of, as the powers that be, I guess I would say, and the school committee property, were trying to figure out what they believed were the best, positions moving forward. There's that pot of money that's already been allocated. And then anything further than that is gonna, would require more monies to be allocated, things going to town meeting, things going to other committees. So I assume we will certainly be involved in those discussions. But in terms of a recommendation right now, is there something you are looking for us to do tonight?
Guess not tonight necessarily. Well, I
Okay.
I didn't know if tonight it's not on your agenda, so I wouldn't expect, that to happen. It was more that I think the conversations have just kind of evolved really fast for
Okay.
where there's an expectation of a vote tomorrow. And
Okay.
the aspects of a vote seem to center around pursuing a repair option for bleacher versus do we or do we not want to endorse that approach and consider putting efforts into replacement. And not that that would happen right away. And there's also obviously timelines and all of that, but that seems to be at a high level. What is the preferred directional approach in investing in a renovation of the current aspects, which would require bringing up to ADA compliance and all that, knowing that in a couple of years they would need to be torn down because replacement would be occurring. Anyway,
Right.
it's thing that I just wanted to put it on the radar. You'll be there tomorrow, but I also I want to make sure I didn't miss anything or other school committee members hadn't missed anything where there was, because it's been kind of pretty fast, the conversations of
Right.
wanting to the direction. So I don't know if the best approach might be like, hey, we wait till if FinCom feels very strongly about getting an opportunity to weigh in. I want to make sure that's considered
Right.
in my thought process. Or if you're not feeling the consensus is lukewarm, where everyone's like, no, we'll just kind of wait until after, then that's good to know as well.
Well,
Okay.
so my feelings are not, my feelings are not lukewarm. I was going to bring this up during member comments. Alana,
Go
as you
ahead.
know, I reached out to you
Yep.
by email, having seen that it was going to be on the, when I was reviewing the select board agenda and seeing that there was a joint committee meeting. I've not seen a lot on the alumni bleachers. And I think, when the money was originally allocated, I guess in annual town meeting, it was for design. In other words, let's figure out what the solution was going to be. And
Right.
then there was an idea that, well, we might need to, we might need to do some repairs. And so, let's expand the uses out there. I'm still concerned with the idea, and I think Natasha probably articulated better than I would have, is the idea of spending a lot of money to repair a structure that's going to be taken down. And while I realize that there are people who feel very strongly that there ought to be bleachers there, and they are absolutely right, we should have bleachers there. But I think it's also equally true that we shouldn't be spending huge amounts of money without having, one, an idea of what we're going to do in the long term, what the long-term solution is going to be. And then if we're going to spend some money, spend that money wisely. And just to give one example, there was some discussion around renting bleachers. And, I asked the question, is the rental long-term for these bleachers more than the purchase price? Because we have other fields where if we bought the bleachers and could save money, in other words, it would cost less to buy them than to rent them long-term. Let's go ahead and buy them. And once we're done with them at Alumni Field, we can move them around to the other. This was not something that was being looked at. And so I feel strongly that we're talking about a very large sum of money. And now this is why, when I saw this and why I reached out to you saying, hey, what's going on here? Do we have any sense? Now,
Right.
you're going to be there tomorrow. I'm going to listen in. Hopefully we'll see, that there is, an idea towards a long-term solution, and then minimizing the amount of money that gets wasted getting us there. But I'm concerned.
Yeah. And I just want to, I do want to let everyone know for their information. If you go to the meeting on board docs, there is all of the information that they're going to be looking at tomorrow, at least in the discussion, is there. Which I don't think all of this has been like separately forwarded to us. So, but it is all there to go look at.
A question. I mean,
Yep.
Town meeting approved the warrant to spend money on engineering services to determine like what needs to be done to bring it up to compliance, correct? And that was not approve the money, but re-specified the money.
So that it could be used for plans, but also for some repairs,
For some
rentals,
repairs.
etc. Yeah.
Now, the amount being contemplated now is it far in excess of what town meeting already approved?
Oh, certainly. I mean, like
yeah.
the scope of the entire project of the bleachers. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Like that isn't the bleachers as a whole in its entirety, depending on how we go. I mean, I've heard is upwards of, over $1 million. Am I correct, Natasha? Something like.
I think
mean-
it's almost heading up to 2 million. We haven't received the most recent estimate. Obviously, this is
Right.
what a design plan would have.
Right.
But like given the cost of inflation and everything the past
Yeah.
couple of years, I think based on the last estimates were about 1 million, and that was like, I don't know, 4 years ago. So if you add even at just 30%, considering how all the construction things have been going recently.
Right.
And then that's also need to factor in the press box on top of that
Yeah.
as well.
Right.
But
So yeah, it's a large project in its
Right.
entirety.
And it would require town meeting approval, I imagine, to do what Ken described in terms of like this temporary fix where you'd like patch up the bleachers,
That's already been approved. That's already been approved. So
Okay.
The 174 and change, they can
Yes.
spend however they decide without further approval.
Yeah.
They can
Anything above,
decide, they can spend it as approved at town meeting, and there was an expanded
Yeah.
set.
right.
There's an expanded scope. Now, is that 175, Ken? Is that your concern? Or are you concerned that they may go and spend in excess of what was approved at town meeting? That's would have to go.
No, I don't think they're gonna spend excess, but they're gonna spend on renting bleachers in order to provide, without looking at a buy versus rent
Rents.
solution. And what I'm saying is there ought to be a discussion about, okay, the money was intended for a design that would get us an estimate of what it was going, is what it's going to be. And, there have been all kinds of things approved, there have been all kinds of things discussed. And I think given the amount of money that this, it is, the analogy is we were very much involved with discussions around the design of the firehouse, the fire station. because at each stage, money was getting spent that would then presuppose further money was going to get spent. And so I think we should be looking at the
Right.
solutions being discussed about the bleachers now, so that when it comes around time for for it to go before town meeting, that we're not finding ourselves too late, that it's too late in the discussion and decisions about a proposal have already been made.
Yeah, and also just a little like history and reminder, when we first approved the 174 for designs, et cetera, that was back in May, and that was prior to the bleachers being cut off from use by the building inspector. So the way this was supposed to flow was we appropriated that money, we were going to get an engineering, was going to give us all the information. We were then going to go with that information, decide about the plans, go to town meeting again for however we were going to do that, borrowing, what have you. In the summer, the bleachers were shut down, and suddenly that timeline was blown away. And now we're talking rentals, and we're in a sort of, trying to provide for the community in the interim, which was never part of the plan. And so it's gotten messier.
Well, I'm just
Well,
trying
and
to ask.
just before we get too much farther on this, okay, this was not the building inspector's fault. This was inaction over many years by the town to do anything about it, and somebody getting hurt and other people getting hurt that was not reported. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
I would also point out the fact that there are other solutions. There are other sources for funding, which aren't necessarily, I don't think, being investigated, including Community Preservation Act funds. And I think we ought to be looking at that in more detail. But of course, I would like to see that going forward.
There is a CPA application, as a matter of fact,
Yeah.
in the board docs. So I think that is being in the mix.
So wait for I'll give you the update, Ken, what I've heard from the CPA regarding this topic. But I'll respect the agenda. I'll let you finish, but I do have some things to say about that.
Okay. I think we can, just for continuity of
All right. Let me
subject.
let me just.
Go
So
ahead.
I did unfortunately have to miss one CPC meeting because of a family emergency. But during the last couple ones, they were discussing extensively the bleachers, and they did determine that it is eligible for CPA funding. However, certain add-on features were not eligible. The biggest item that I recall that was not eligible was the press box, because that counts as an enclosed structure. So we may not be able to get everything through CPA funding. But my view is that, given the fact that the state reimburses us for a certain amount of funding, the most like financially, the least costly funding source, I should say, would be the CPA route. Other ones would the state reimburses us, I think, like a certain percentage. I think it's like 50%. Don't quote me on that.
It depends on the year.
Yeah,
it fluctuates. It was very good to us this past year. There have been years where it's been lower, more like 23%, things like that. But yeah, it's a
it's a significant percent that would minimize the tax implications of this project were we to go with the CPA route. But again, we would not get a press box out of it, and there are certain limitations. Right. The CPC was going through a lot of minutia regarding what is and what's not considered. It's kind of, they're being very careful, but there are certain things that would prevent it, like a press box. So we can't have a press box. But again,
no, we can have a press box. We need a press box, but we have to build it and fund it in such a way that it is not tied to the CPA
It's
funding.
not tied to, it's not, yeah.
Right.
it-
I don't want it out there that
Yeah.
we can't have a press box, you know.
Yeah,
Sometimes people hear things and then they're like, what? Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that case, I, you know, I'm new to this, but yeah, so we just have to figure out, but a press box is probably not in the scope of a million plus 2 million now that we're talking, a press box is not the major impact as the rest of the structure is.
Okay.
Other than that, am I giving my update now, or do you just want to continue on this topic and like Ken?
No, it was just
give
going on this topic. Yeah.
Okay.
Natasha, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that that the school department is still proceeding with a CPC application for, so that is in the works and will be submitted, I believe, this week. I think it's actually maybe due tomorrow, possibly if it hadn't been already. And the superintendent was also bringing that back to the stakeholders at their task force to get other boards to send recommendations as to whether how they view that. The question about the funding, going back to the article about the 173, 174 that had already been allocated, if the monies are primarily used for repairs, which will be over 80, maybe somewhere between 80 and $100,000 based on what has been provided, plus you factor in rentals, that will not leave money for design, which was the intent of the money. So that just wanted to, bring that up. We still will be, all of that will be repairs in the interim, and you still don't have designs coming. So just to add to that flavor of conversation that as we think about the intent of what the funds were for and what their ultimate outcome might be, that would be the concern. I think that's been expressed by many.
I mean, I share those. Can I respond, Madam Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
I share those concerns on a personal level, Natasha, but town meeting approved the warrant, and they decided to give the select board broad leeway into how those funds are spent. But I do share those concerns that, we originally had 174 allocated to planning this project out. And now, instead of spending that money to plan that project, we're now spending on essentially a Band-Aid just to keep up level services for parents. And you could go back, if you go back to prior meetings, you could actually see me voicing very forcefully this concern to Greg. But as I
Okay.
said, town meeting approved it. So
I think the outcome of tomorrow, just to clarify, is that the select board will be seeking the endorsement of whether the school committee is wanting to pursue that option. So that may not be the consensus of what the school committee votes on. And that may help inform the select board as to whether they then consider that if the school committee does not recommend using the substantive use of those for repairs or renovations or however you want to word it, the select board may not proceed with that. But then it leaves a question on then what, right? So anyway, just wanted to clarify, it's not a done deal, as that's a definitive outcome. That is what it's approved for, if everyone, I think, is on board. But the intention of reallocating that was that it would still be decided, a larger decision, once we got information from the engineer, and that has recently come back.
To Ken's point, a question again for Natasha. Has anyone in the schools done a rent versus buy financial analysis that does like a price, get a quote? I mean, you guys are actually sitting on the quotes for like the rentals. So has anyone done that financial analysis, whether it's cheaper to buy or rent?
There is some information that's in the packet for tomorrow. It's a lot. Some of it relates to, I think I remember reading, some of them are supposed to be mobile, where they're not intended to be left out all the time. And so the
Right.
longevity of buying certain types that are temporary will lessen their longevity and use for other areas, because they're intended to be stored in some places. So so there's all of those pieces have been asked. I don't know if they're all been answered in all the packet information, so that will probably be part of the conversations as well. I'm still waiting to get more information myself, because I had asked Brian about what does it look like for the time frame, like what do we need to rent in the spring, right? What does that look
Mhm.
like? How long that period would be, because you do need to have that total anticipated expense to factor in. Is it easier to buy and rent, or whatever that might look like? So
Mhm.
ultimately, as one person, we need designs. I will say that is, I feel very strongly that we can no longer proceed. And even if we do repairs for the things that were put into the report, that does not guarantee that other things that were not highlighted in the report could potentially proceed to their end of life at some point, because they're, again, not really intended, like we still missing a whole bunch of other things that could potentially be solved with new. So anyway,
Mhm.
that's it.
Do you,
Okay.
do you have those outstanding those risks documented somewhere, Natasha? Like those possible points of failure. Yeah.
I can't predict what would fail on the bleachers, no, in the future. I just know when things are old, when you're kind of patching and you're doing repairs, I mean, they're not new. So whatever you do, they're still not going to be new. They're only going to be renovated or repaired to an extent. So they're not going to be, I wouldn't say they would be worth for 10 more years. I think that would be stretching that, right? And I don't know if I'd want them to be, because they're not
Right.
intended to be how they
Right.
are.
But
Yeah, I think the main thought was, is it knowing that a full replace of what we really need, it could be a certain amount of time down the road. That would
Right.
be, what do we do in the interim? Is it better to repair what we have for an interim, or rent, buy something, like we have now for that entire interim?
And I think there has been also concern that, because in the future we are being asking the town about money for Green Meadow, if there is a lack of confidence that the town feels that we can't, what we're doing with this particular structure, that we're not addressing it, that could potentially impede the confidence in allocating a lot more money for a school. And so I think that's something that was brought up, I think, in the building committee meeting, Jerry Colbert, that Mary had expressed. And I do individually share that concern, that if we are not able to put a plan that's positive in place for this, and then we're going to be asking the town for money about, like, there's just that like lack of confidence that could come across, that you can't even address the bleacher issue to get new bleachers, and what's going on. There also has been a conversation of maybe it gets lumped into that ask, and as to one larger ask, which 2 million. So I don't know what the outcome will be. That's all, again, hypothetical.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, I would think, no, I mean, and maybe I'm wrong, but the MSBA is very, we're already so far down that road for Green Meadow, and the MSBA is pretty, it's particular. I don't think we could just be like, oh, and by the way,
I
we're
think it
gonna
was more
throw.
about what we would be asking the town to fund, right? So
Oh,
it
I
wouldn't
see, I
be,
see.
that would
Okay.
be adding to that project. It would be the
Okay,
article of funding. So it maybe add 2
I
more
see, I
million
see,
on top of
I
that,
see. Okay,
and of what we would be funding anyway.
right,
Again, all
okay,
hypotheticals, but have been kind of bounced around as possibilities,
right.
and need a broader discussion.
All right, well, I will just ask, obviously, we didn't post like a meeting or have like we're asked to be a three-way, like tri-board for this for tomorrow, at least. But I will be there, but I cannot, speak on behalf of the committee. But if there was anything, I don't know, I guess I'm asking is if there's anything particular that anyone would like me to ask or put forward in the record of the meeting, could certainly discuss anything like that.
Well, again, I think there are two things that we're shooting for. The money was approved towards design of a solution. And so that's the main thing that money was intended for. We recognize that an interim, since the ultimate solution will take so long to
Right.
put in place, that there's something that we need to do in the interim. What that is, I think, needs to be discussed, because I've heard proposals about people saying we need to put money into the current bleachers in order to repair them, because I want to be able to sit in the middle so that I can see my son's football game. Now, I appreciate that. Having had two children two high schoolers who were in sports, I get that. Okay. But spending a bunch of money into something that is going to have to be torn down doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, the alternative was, well, we could rent we could rent bleachers. Well, wouldn't that be a waste of money? No, I don't think it would be a waste of money if we bought those bleachers, because we have other sports fields that need bleachers. There's a lower there's the lower sports field where they play field hockey and where the cross country goes. And I would guess that those bleachers are certainly more than 10 years old. And so I heard people sitting there going, well, you can't store these ones outside because the wheels will go bad. Well, why can't you use them outside? So what if the wheels go bad? If you're buying them permanently, then take the wheels off, store the wheels, and put that. This is the kind of thinking I wish somebody would put into it, of a more holistic solution, not just looking at alumni field alone.
Yeah, I agree with Ken's sentiment as well. Although I have not seen the school's build versus buy analysis yet. I am going to read it over. I'm not going to be at the meeting tomorrow because I don't want to create a quorum for you guys who are officially liaisons with the board, but I will be reviewing the document and the YouTube recording once it's uploaded. But Ken, if you're amenable, I would like to continue this discussion at our next meeting.
Our next,
We do.
continue the bleacher discussion at our next FinCom meeting? Is that
Yeah.
what you're, yeah,
Yep.
okay. We can certainly, we'll give an update. And you certainly can, if you really want to see it live, you certainly can be there. First of all, quorum for us is 4, but even above and beyond that, as long as we are not discussing anything between ourselves during the meeting.
Okay, I may.
If you just want to watch and listen,
Yeah,
you are absolutely allowed to do that.
The meetings are recorded,
yeah.
And so you can
Yeah.
certainly view
You
them.
can, and you can watch it later.
Yeah,
and
I
speed it up.
certainly want to
just-
preserve the right for you guys to speak if
Yeah.
you want to speak, because I'm not the
Well,
official. I'm not the official liaison, but you can't speak anyway, so I guess it's a moot point.
No, I mean,
I guess you
can't
could speak.
I can't speak on behalf of FinCom, although correct me if I'm wrong, Ken. I mean, if asked if we've discussed this in our meeting, am I allowed to report?
Certainly, you can
Yeah.
report that. I mean, there hasn't been any deliberation or discussion or decision.
Right.
Excuse me, there hasn't been any deliberation or decision made.
Right.
And.
But I
you
could
know,
say there are concerns and the nature of the concerns.
You know what, I'll just make it easy on you guys. I'll just watch the recording.
Yeah, no, that's
I'll
fine.
make it easy so we don't have to sweat it. I'll just watch
Just-
the recording. There's no pressing need for me to be there if I'm just
Yep.
watching and staying silent, but
Totally. Okay. So all right. So let's circle back a little bit and get through a little housekeeping and approve our minutes, and then we'll go back if there's any other updates from members. And we've already talked a good amount about future agenda, so that should go pretty quickly, and then we'll get us out of here. So why don't I share the minutes? And
So while you're doing that,
Yep.
I'll take a minute to express thanks to Danielle for her work on the model, and thanks to Katie for continuing to do the minutes.
And
Hear, hear.
Ken, I apologize. I, for some reason, didn't put the last meeting on my calendar. And my biggest, I was like, who's going to take the minutes? That's like, you know, and so I think you probably did. So thank you. Whoever filled in
Oh,
for me. Was it you?
It was Danielle.
Oh, Danielle, thank you. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But
As long as I
here,
don't have to do it all the time, I'm good.
yeah.
Share it up.
So here are the minutes from September 26th. Actually, we have two to,
September 26th.
yeah, we have two tonight. We have two tonight to approve. So search your memory banks. But here they are. This was back when we, before special town meeting, and we were going through the articles.
Having done a full review of my notes and searching my memory banks, I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes for September 26th.
26.
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Or corrections.
Corrections? We will do a roll call vote then. Ken,
Yes.
Danielle,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
Jillian.
I was not present, so I will abstain from this one.
Okay. And Peter.
Yes.
Okay.
By the
And-
way, as you go to the next ones, do we need Lori anymore?
Actually, I don't think so. Lori, if you're hanging on, you can stop hanging on.
I'm still here hanging on in case you need me.
No, I think we're good. We're just gonna do some housekeeping. So
All righty. Thanks,
thank
Ken.
you. Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Thanks, guys.
All right. And these are October 17th from our public hearing. We went through all the articles.
Oh, you were good, Danielle. You're detailed.
These,
Don't take the bait, Danielle. She's just trying to butter you up.
Oh, I know this game. You do a wonderful job, Katie.
Why, thank you.
all right. So I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes from October 17th.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or corrections? All right, then roll call. Ken,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
Danielle,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Katie,
I was not there, so I'll abstain from it.
okay, and Peter.
Yes.
All right, and I'm a yes as well. All right, excellent. Thank you for those, Katie and Danielle. Do we have any other member updates?
Just a brief one.
Yep.
So yeah, so So I already updated on the CPC.
Mhm.
Just going forward, I'd like to start in the spirit of the budget discussion and the bleachers. I would like to start putting together a state of the facilities report, like pulling in from capital planning, pulling in from DPW, asking the questions, what parts of our infrastructure are at risk of failure or needing major repairs work in the next 5 years. And I'd kind of like to put that list together to assist in either our financial planning, like is this like an anticipated expense, and to also communicate to the town meeting voters that, hey, you know, here's our budget. When we go present the budget, I want to communicate to the town meeting voters that we are making an active decision to either do preventive maintenance work on these at-risk structures, or we're deciding deliberately to for maintenance on these at-risk structures.
Okay.
I did want to let you know, I think that the Capcom has such a document already.
And I
Yeah.
tend to ask them, but I want to do a broad search. So I want to ask Capcom, I want to ask DPW. I just want to put a bunch of information together and then present a sort of a mini report when we have that budget discussion of like, here are the items we're going to do preventive maintenance on. Here are the items for X, Y, and Z reasons we're deciding to forgo maintenance or spending on.
Yeah, and I think just to echo Jillian a little bit, we do need to be just a little bit careful and respectful that we're not stepping on anyone else's, you know, toes. So I think let's have the discussion with Capcom, which
Yep.
we have on our schedule, and see what comes out of that discussion, and then see where we think there may be other asks that might be there, and then go from there before we, you know, just before we go and ask, say, like, Justin, what are your, he'd be like, I already gave that to Capcom. Do you know what I mean? I just
Yep.
I don't want to duplicate any work or make anyone think that, you know,
Perfectly
they have
reasonable.
to do things twice. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree with the thought process and knowing the information that comes from it.
So if I could weigh in just momentarily on this.
Sure.
I think Kevin's got a great idea here. I do agree with what Joe was saying and others that the Capcom and DPW may have a list. I do wonder to what extent their list has the information that Kevin is suggesting around risk of deferred maintenance. In other words, I would suspect that that the the Capcom and DPW may be focused more on priorities for capital expenditures and may not be looking at the cost of deferred maintenance. Now, the reason why I think this is an important issue is if you take a look at the current situation we have ourselves in with the bleachers, this is something that has been on the list for a long time as being an expenditure, a lower priority expenditure. But I wonder to what extent we may have benefited from a risk assessment of continued deferred maintenance in terms of not only cost over the long term, but risk of people getting hurt and so forth. So I do agree with the caution that we should inquire to DPW and the Capcom of what they have. But what Kevin is asking for, and which I think that we as a FinCom ought to be pushing for, is something beyond cost and prioritization, but really getting at the risk of what the financial and other risk is of deferred maintenance. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yep. All right. Any other member updates?
Just a question, Alana.
Yep, sure.
When is our meeting with the capital planning committee scheduled?
It is our next meeting.
It is our next meeting.
They are,
Fantastic.
yep, they will be with us at our next meeting, November 28th.
Have you reached out to DPW yet?
I have not.
No, sorry. Alana, have you reached out to DPW about scheduling?
No, that was something I was going to do after tonight's meeting
Okay,
with our
all right.
discussion of,
Okay,
yeah, of the budget. So I will, and I'll get them in before
Yeah.
the February meeting for sure.
I did have a Green Meadow Building committee meeting.
Mhm.
And there's another one, 11/29 is their next meeting, but it seemed to be centered around cost of a net zero building versus a happy medium to what that cost could be to deliver that. So they're looking at different energy efficient ways to heat and cool the building, whether that's geothermal versus heat pumps versus, all of the options. Looking at the lifestyle cost of that, and analysis is still to come. Low maintenance landscaping. Their landscaping picture looks like a lot, but they're trying to keep it low maintenance, supposedly. Greg signed off on the Mass Save Phase 1 portion, and we had to do that to get rebates payable at the end of construction. And that's all I got.
Okay.
I have a couple quick ones.
Sure.
Charter Review Committee is working on kind of wrapping up the charter review. And so I think the draft that we aligned on was submitted to the town clerk this week, or potentially late last week.
Okay.
But we last met on the 9th. And then working with our town planner, I got involved in the focus groups for the Powder Mill corridor project. So I'll send some information over to you, Alana, that you can forward to everyone. But there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people to get involved and share opinions and such. So I joined a focus group where it was an assortment of residents and business owners, just kind of talking about what they'd like to see, what they don't want to see in that area. And they're going to do a series of those. And this is kind of phase 2. So it's a good time to get involved in that. So I'll send that over if anyone's interested.
if the charter review committee is finishing up, I'd like our committee to get a copy of what's being proposed so that we can take a look at it in a more deliberative way. Because if this is gonna, I assume this is gonna go forward for vote at annual town meeting.
I think that's the plan. They just
Yeah.
went through like the AG review and all of that.
Well, I'd like to see what is in it for the FinCom.
Okay.
And I think the rest of the committee should, we should probably, so if it's been forwarded to the town clerk or whomever, if the charter review committee has a finished copy, then if you've got it, Daniel, you can pass it on to Alana or whatever and get it out. In particular, I want to make sure that, that we're taking a look at, we have a lot of interfaces with different boards and different people in town administration. I just want to make sure that that's clarified. Those duties and roles are clarified.
Yep, and there's a helpful summary document too that kind of talks about a lot of the overarching changes and the intent and all of that. So
yeah, that would be very helpful.
yeah, it is, because once you start getting into the red lines, you can get lost.
Yeah. Right. Okay,
that's
thank
it
you.
for me.
Okay, the only other update that I had is I was sworn in as our representative as a non-voting member, of course, for the trash and recycling task force, when that had come up as something Greg and Justin were getting together. I had sent an email and said, well, let's get someone on FinCom. I didn't realize it was going to be one of those. They like to do things very formally. Greg likes to make sure he's doing things by the book. So they suddenly were like, well, come get sworn in. I was like, okay. As a non-voting member, of course, because we're not allowed, but I don't know when that's going to start up exactly. I think they're waiting to have the committee fully formed, but I will keep you all informed on the status of that. And the purpose of that is to have representatives from staff, committees, town members at large to start looking into our trash and recycling program and where it's going to go after this temporary extension of our contract, which we had just done. So more to come on that. And certainly something I'm sure we can talk to Justin about when we have him in. I think that was it for my updates. And I think we've got our next few meetings pretty well mapped out. So if we don't have anything else to add, I think I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
All right, do we have a second?
A second.
Okay. I'll do a roll call vote. All those in favor, Ken,
Yes.
Danielle,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. It is 9:58. Thank you all so much for really good discussion tonight.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Night, everybody.
Night all.
Take care, everybody.